Good day, everybody. This is your lucky day. Why? Because you get to listen to Mr. H talk about history. Plus, this is kind of a twofer. Today's lecture is going to cover chapter 25 and 26, the Cold War. I'm going to go up to about 1960. So if you see something about JFK, you can stop reading there on chapter 25. And the affluent society, that's the 50s. So we're covering both of those today. Now, we know that your friend Truman here, who's the vice president when FDR died, so he ran for office in 1948. Nobody thought he was going to win, and guess what? He wins. You thought 2016 the media made a big mistake with the presidential election. Yeah, believe me, it's nothing new. It's almost a tradition for the media to get presidential elections wrong. Do you know he had this framed in the White House when he won the election in 1948? Yeah, and you wonder why he can't stand reporters, man. Well, it's Harry Truman for you. Now, Truman's a completely different guy than FDR. FDR was born into wealth. Harry Truman, no one expected this guy to be president. Yeah, he's the vice president, but you never really expect him to actually do anything until, the president dies. So suddenly, Truman's there. He actually gets reelected in 1948 by the skin of his teeth. He wasn't born into wealth. He grew up as a shopkeeper over in Independence, Missouri. Veteran of the First World War, is in the trenches with the Missouri National Guard. Very much against segregation. He thought, if you same thing I said in the last lecture, you're crazy enough to fight next to me. Hey, man, welcome aboard, right? And he actually desegregated the U.S. military by executive order. And you know which one it is. You wrote it down last time, right? Yeah, go back and look at it. And and he's a Democrat. It's the fifth straight win for the Democrats, which is really kind of amazing. Well, he's actually the wrong guy for the Cold War. Weirdly enough, Stalin, committed communist, got along really well with FDR, who was basically a half step removed from an aristocrat. Now, would it have changed anything? I don't know. But Harry Truman was very much a confrontational sort of person. Just the way he grew up, hard scrabble, always fighting against the political class. No one expected him to do anything. So he naturally carries that kind of chip on his shoulder even into international affairs. And Stalin, of course, is a paranoid sort of guy anyway, given the way he grew up. So, and what he's been through and what Russia's been through. So, Cold War's coming. It's kind of a miracle it didn't get hot. So they call this the Iron Curtain. Here's where communism meets capitalist democracy, right here in the middle of Germany and Czechoslovakia, Austria for a while. Then they agreed to make this neutral. So this is the Iron Curtain. Here is the free world. Eventually, you're going to form a couple military alliances, Warsaw Pact, NATO, more on that later. So this is where World War III might actually start. In Berlin, they've even divided Berlin. There's an East Berlin, West Berlin, U.S., British, and French occupation forces there, and of course East Berlin, Soviet/East Germany. So this is where the Cold War starts, the front end, the front line of the Cold War. Now, when you wonder why did it go the way it did, well, first they started arguing really about Poland. Why Poland? Because that's where the Second War started, right? It was over Polish nationality. Do they get how they treat the Germans? Does Poland have its own government? Because they're between the Russians and the Germans. There's been a big Polish problem for a long time. Well, now that the Russians are sitting in Poland, they're not going to let it go because, all the invasions of Russia come from the West. They got to come through Poland, so the Russians are sitting right on top of it. We talk about free elections for everybody, including Poland. And the way the Russians see it is, Poland is not a question of honor for Russia, but of life and death. Remember, they've been invaded so many times coming through that area. They have a completely different view of the world than we do. We never had to rebuild Boston brick by brick. Columbia didn't come up through Mexico and destroy Los Angeles. Not that that would be a really bad thing. But the point is that's never actually happened. And if I may, I'm going to ask you a personal question here. How did your grandparents die? All right, hopefully they're still around. But if you've lost them, I like to think they just kind of died peacefully in bed from old age. In Russia, I got news for you. A lot of their grandparents, great grandparents, died in the Second World War. My grandparents were shot by Nazis. So, I can kind of see where they're coming from, and that hopefully gives you an idea of kind of how the Russians see the world. Much different than we do, because when's the last time we've actually been invaded? Yeah, the British in the Revolutionary War, yeah, they burned down the White House in 1814, right? But the last time we had a war on our own soil was the Civil War, and that was between Americans. Once again, whole different view of the world. Well, the term Iron Curtain came from our friend Winston Churchill, who was at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, giving a speech, February of 1946. An iron curtain has fallen across half of Europe. Some people call it the declaration of World War III. That seems to be, a little much. Strangely enough, there are 6 million Polish American voters in this particular election year coming up in 1948. And we're just talking about Poland, so yeah, wonder about that. A lot of them live in Chicago, a lot of them in Pittsburgh. Oh, big places you need to win for votes. What a surprise. Here's George F. Kennan. He lived until 2010. Nice long life. George F. Kennan's the architect of containment. Here is the official definition of containment. The U.S. grand strategy for the Cold War, a long-term plan in uniting military, economic, and diplomatic efforts to contain communist expansion until internal contradictions in the Soviet Union bring its collapse. In other words, keep the Russians from exporting communism all over the place. The way the Russians see the world, much and hostile, is that if I make a country on my border communist, it's not going to attack me. So then I got to make a country on that country's border communist. It doesn't attack that country, therefore I don't get attacked. Remember that map? You got Russia, Poland's communist, East Germany's communist. Just keep pushing this thing out in every direction so that Russia can't get hit. Now, the way we look at it, we see a communist totalitarian government that looks a lot like, the other Nazi totalitarian government we just defeated. So the U.S. tries to keep communism expanding. The Soviet Union is trying to export it all over the place. Now, the internal contradictions of the Soviet system, what he's talking about is economics. Soviet and communist economies don't work very well. Very simple. There's no profit motive. And if you can't work for something, people don't work as much. Plus, if you work in a country that's constantly spying on you and you get sent to a gulag for anything, people aren't very enthusiastic about being there. And the Berlin Wall tells you everything you need to know about communism. Had a wall up with barbed wire and machine guns, and they're pointed inward to keep people from leaving. You put walls up to keep people from coming in. If you're keeping it up to keep people from leaving, something's wrong. Anyway, he thinks eventually it's going to cause the Soviet Union to collapse. Does it work? Look on the map. Do you see Soviet Union anywhere? No, you don't. I keep bringing up this point over and over and over. Two different views of the world. We see it as the Russians can expand in any direction and threaten anybody. The Russians see the whole world as threatening them. Who's right and who's wrong? Depends who you ask, right? Americans think the Soviet Union is the aggressor. The Soviet Union thinks the United States is the aggressor. As one of my students once told me, the Cold War was basically two people pointing at each other in a mirror. You call the Americans aggressors for establishing NATO in Western Europe because it could attack the Soviet Union. Or the United States says the Soviet Union establishes the Warsaw Pact so it can attack Western Europe. Here we are. Who's right, who's wrong? Usually both are right and wrong. Welcome to history. Now, on the domestic side, we're preparing for a long-term Cold War. We got the National Security Act of 1947. That affects everybody up in the Valencia area. The armed forces are combined into the Defense Department. No longer Department of War, is now Defense Department. Doesn't sound quite as vicious, right? Defense Department. Only if you attack us. That's where the Army, Navy, Air Force becomes independent. It used to be part of the Army. Now it's its own thing. Got a Coast Guard, Marines. The CIA is established. Used to be the Office of Strategic Services. Now they got an actual apparatus here. CIA. They're supposed to do, spy stuff, intelligence, occasionally overthrow somebody's government. Not officially, but it does happen. Got the National Security Council is exactly that, National Security Council, right? Anything that involves national security gets together to talk about it. And here we go with the alphabet soup agencies, just like the Great Depression, except this time it's the Cold War. We got the Defense Intelligence Agency. Seems to do the same thing the CIA does, doesn't it? More militaristic, but same sort of idea. National Security Agency, another group of people, civilian type organization, seems to do the same thing the CIA does. A lot of this stuff apparently seems redundant because they were terrified if there was a nuclear strike, then, one organization gets destroyed, the other one can take over. Nonetheless, these things can kind of run out of control on their own, as we're going to see later. I call it the IRW. Idiots running wild. Spoiler alert, Joseph McCarthy's on the way. In their zeal to defend communism, they kind of went overboard and became sort of communistic themselves in the way they were acting. You'll see what I get to when I get to McCarthy. Now, the Truman Doctrine. Here we are. Truman is committed to his containment. He's going to keep the Soviet Union contained. It's not going to get loose. Communism is not going to spread. It will spread in some places and not some in others. But he issues forth the Truman Doctrine. Basically, he's throwing down the gauntlet in front of the Soviet Union. The United States will try to support any free people resisting attack and subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. Translation, if there's a communist rebellion, the United States is going to come and try to help you. $400 million go to Greece because there's a communist insurrection there, and Turkey, another communist revolt, $400 million of American money, aid, weaponry, go to help those countries. For that kind of money, you better do more than try, pal. That's what this comes from. $400 million. It's a lot of money, especially back then. I'll still take it, no problem. So Truman is ready to contain communism. Anybody who wants our help is going to get it. Even if you don't want the help, you might still end up getting it. And here we go, the Berlin airlift. Well, here's the idea. Now, in order to get to West Berlin, you saw the map, we have to drive through East Germany. This is a highway we're allowed to use. Well, the Russians decide they're going to try and push us out of West Berlin. East Berlin belongs to them. West Berlin is U.S., British, and French. So they cut off the road. They won't let anybody through. So what are we supposed to do? Shoot our way through and start World War III? Some people wanted to do that, but we have an atomic bomb. They don't. But Truman decided, no, we're not really up for another world war quite yet. So let's fly over them. So we have American planes flying into Berlin. 3 years ago we were bombing it. Now we're flying supplies in. Occasionally Russian planes will try to buzz them and harass them, but they're not going to try and shoot them down. And we have to airlift about 3 million tons of food and supply into Berlin to keep that city alive. Couldn't quite get to 3 million that often, but got a lot of food in. There were some tough days, but hey, they made it through, and in 1949, the Russians decided just to lift the blockade here. Stalin was very upset. This is the first time anybody had told him no, and this was with a capital O, a capital N, and a capital O, and knowing Truman, there's probably a middle finger in there someplace. So we got to help out Europe. Europe has been completely demolished and destroyed. What happened last time? A country in Europe was in the middle of a depression, like Germany. Yeah, what kind of extremist? Guy Hitler shows up, Italy with Mussolini. Well, Europe right now is in really bad shape, and some of these people are starting to look at the Communist Workers' Party of France and Britain and Italy, and maybe they can get them out of the mess. Actually, communists won a couple seats in Italy, so it's time to move forward with the Marshall Plan. Some people call it the European Recovery Plan. Secretary of State Marshall came up with this. Basically, we sent $13 billion to Europe, $130 billion today, loans to get factories going. If the factories get going, people have jobs now, building streets, jobs, money, same 3 R's. Remember the 3 R's from the Depression? Same thing's going to happen here in Europe after the Second World War. That way, people don't start looking at communism. Now that your own country is functioning again and feeding you, you can love your nation again. In 1946, we'd given Britain a $3.5 billion loan to get them on their feet. So that's kind of where the idea came from. We gave Britain a loan in 1946, and I decided to give it to all of Western Europe in 1947. Takes a while to build factories, but once they got rolling, look at this. Just a few years later, in 1952, Western Europe's industrial production, 200% increase. Money well spent, no communists anywhere to be seen. So now we have got to defend Western Europe from the Soviet threat. Or, as the Russians would say, they're going to establish the Warsaw Pact to defend from the Western threat. But hey, we built up NATO in 1949, United States, Britain, France, yeah, even Portugal. Iceland, yay, Iceland have a military. Let's use their bases for free. Here's Norway, Denmark, already mentioned Italy. This is original NATO. This is going to be the shield that keeps the Russians away. Germany's still under occupation. If there's a war, the war is going to be in Germany. 1952, Greece and Turkey joined. They don't like each other, but they're both terrified of the Russians. They're in the same alliance now. Not saying it's perfect, but it happens, right? It works. 1955, West Germany joins NATO, and it freaks out the Russians. All this stuff comes later after the Cold War. Don't worry about it. Spain joins in 82. They've been working with our Navy since 1945. Wasn't such a big deal, right? So the minute West Germany joins, they start getting worried in Moscow. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, defensive alliance, attack on ones, attack on everybody. Forgot to mention Canada, but people frequently forget to mention Canada on a lot of things. So here's NATO. Everyone's happy about NATO. It's supposed to be treaty up there. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. No, they're not tossing Hershey bars all over the place. That's a great way to win friends. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, defensive alliance against possible Soviet aggression. Russians don't see it that way. Yep, they have their own view of NATO, especially when West Germany joins in 1955. National Security Paper, 68. Yep, April of 1950. 58 pages long. How do I know this? Because Mr. H had to read and write a bunch of papers on it. But I am going to summarize it for you right here. Now, this describes the U.S. view of the Cold War. They see it as a military confrontation. Big surprise. That's where NATO comes from. They think the Soviet military, aggression, territorial greed, it's world domination they're convinced the Soviet Union is after. The Russians want to conquer the world, much like the Nazis. Instead of Nazis, it's communism, but still a huge threat. And the Soviet Union, in case you haven't noticed, is a very big country. And in 1949, they end up having their own atomic bomb. So now we have a large, vicious, angry-looking country that now has the atomic bomb. Yeah, they're a little bit afraid of the Soviet Union. They should be. Of course, they never thought that maybe the Soviet Union's afraid of us. You should be. We're America. Look at that. Big. Now, we talked about what's going on in Europe. Let's talk about the Cold War in Asia. Because here's where it's going to get hot. China becomes communist in 1949. The world's largest populated country becomes communist, starts all kind of hysteria over here in the States. Soviet Union, China on the same side. Hey, Mongolia, you're joining whether you like it or not. At the end of the Second World War, the Russians came down through Manchuria, chasing the Japanese out. They came down through Korea. We had occupied Japan at the end of the war, occupying Korea, and we meet the Russians right here. They establish a Korean government. We establish a Korean government. Over there, it's East Germany and West Germany. Here, it's North Korea and South Korea. Well, the Russians leave. We leave. North Korea decides to attack South Korea. The North Korean army is built up pretty big. It's ready to roll tanks, artillery, even jet aircraft, the old MiG-15 and all stuff. South Korea's military is 35,000 strong, 1 dozen tanks, no artillery. North Korea just smashes through, and they are pushing the South Koreans down there. So the United States intervenes. We figure this thing will be over in a week. Newsflash, it's not over in a week. Douglas MacArthur, running Japan, comes over here. He's actually going to start a landing on Incheon and then cuts the North Koreans down. We push them up. About to conquer Korea. Now, the United Nations had given us a mandate to save South Korea. When they pushed the North Koreans over the border, we had saved South Korea. Mission accomplished. But MacArthur thought, I could safeguard Korea. We never to do this again if I completely destroy North Korea. So he attempts to destroy North Korea. Everyone's okay with it because you don't see anybody stopping them. Get up here and suddenly the Chinese intervene. The Chinese had threatened to come in. MacArthur said they won't do it. He just knows he won't. Guess what? 300,000 Chinese come pouring over the Yalu River. We start getting pushed back again. They fire MacArthur. We got Ridgway in charge. We start hitting with the bombers. We drive them back to the current border, and everybody decides to call it a day. Korean War, 1950 to 1951 was the active fighting. We had an armistice. 1953, we've had a permanent ceasefire. And President Trump's been talking to Kim Il-jung over there for the last couple of years. Who knows? Maybe, just maybe, this thing comes to an official end. I don't think North Korea is ever going to attack anybody, because if they do, they're going to lose. But this is where the Cold War got hot, and a lot of people were scared this might have been the beginning of World War III, because you start something in Korea, what can happen in Europe? There's another view of it here. Korea, North Korea, South Korea, current border still here. Now back on the domestic side, over here in the States, after the war, we have a huge economic boom. It was happening during the war. Great Depression, that got blown out of the water when the war started, because everybody had a job, either in the U.S. military or the women in the factories. And as you also saw, the kids dropped out of school to go work in the factories and make a lot of money. Then everybody came back, and the women go back to the kitchen. They made a bunch of money. They're ready to take a break. The men are back in the factories. It was a huge economic boom. $140 million estimated in bank accounts at the end of the war, because there was nothing to spend it on. That's about $1.8 billion today. And now we got the big spending spree. Let's go buy a refrigerator. Let's go buy an oven. Let's go buy a car. Let's go buy a house in the suburbs. The big spending spree right here. All this stuff needs to be manufactured, needs to be transported, need a factory, need people working in the factory. Got to sell it in the stores. Our gross national product, or gross domestic product, these terms are kind of interchangeable, keeps going up constantly from 1945, couple downturns along the way, very minor. 2008, very bad downturn. But, no one's starving to death, so we got that working out for us. The GI Bill was started in 1944, because a lot of people, of course, they have to quit their job. They'd be in the military. They're gone for 4 years. A lot of things are going to change. The GI Bill provides for job training, 4 years of higher education. A lot of people going to college, a lot of 26 and 27-year-old freshmen. We got loans for houses, business loans. College becomes democratized. Instead of 4% of people in the colleges with degrees, we're on our way to 15, currently 25% today. And of course, here's the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. This doesn't mean a lot in North Carolina, but a place like Pennsylvania, this means a lot. It's about unions. You don't have to join a union if you don't want to. Employers cannot ban union. If you want to form a union, you can. And if you work there, you don't even have to join the union. And if there's a really big strike, the president can intervene, declare a cooling off period. Everybody goes back to work. We talk about this stuff a little bit calmer, like in a month or so. Like I said, this is more of a Pennsylvania thing. It's not really, North Carolina, but good thing to know, because you never know. People like to build factories in different places. Oh, communism in America. Everyone's terrified. They see communists all over the place. Soviet Union is an aggressive nation. We had a standoff there in Berlin. We had the Korean War. Are the Russians actively trying to conquer the world? And the Russians are also famous for espionage. This isn't something that was born with the Soviet Union. They've always been good with spies, even back during the days of the Tsar and all the way back to Ivan the Great. Well, for some reason, when China went communist in 1949, everybody blamed the State Department. Why? Because you're supposed to know about this stuff. Alger Hiss in the State Department, everybody thought he was a KGB plant. Couldn't prove he was, but we couldn't really prove he wasn't either. A lot of secret stuff that no one's supposed to know showed up in Moscow. Went to prison for perjury because he actually joined the Communist Party in the 30s. But remember something. In the 30s, during the Great Depression, a lot of people, were looking at communism because, capitalism clearly wasn't working. And, if you showed up for a couple meetings, your name was on the register, you thought it was funny, and you left, fine. But now, 20 years later, here in the 50s, people find these things, they start looking at you, especially when they're terrified of communism. And a lot of people are going to have a lot of trouble because of stuff like this, even though it's protected under the Constitution. But when you get scared, you start doing stuff you normally wouldn't do. And then they started finding other spies, like Klaus Fuchs. This is a German-born scientist. He's been working on the Manhattan Project. He was passing stuff on to the Soviet Union in 1944 and 45. Look at those years. What's so big about 1944 and 1945? Yeah, it's the middle of the Second World War. The Soviet Union is spying on us, even though we're allies at the time. You see, people are like screaming, don't trust the Russians, don't trust the Soviet Union. And we got Julius and Ethel Rosenberg convicted of passing on nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. Does not go well. Both going to get executed. Got the electric chair. I telling you, man, the Cold War, everybody gets it. None of this, I treat you nice because you're a lady. You're going to get the electric chair too, though they put them next to each other in two separate electric chairs. I guess that was nice of them. And now we got nuts like this. Joseph McCarthy. Remember Idiots Running Wild? Here's the head guy. I have here in my hand a list of 205 people that were known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, who are nonetheless still working and shaping the policy of the State Department. Yeah, well, the point is, like I said, back in the 30s, people were willing to give communism a try, and clearly they didn't believe in it because they left it, and there is no actual, viable Communist Workers' Party. It does exist, but no one really pays it any attention. And because your name's on that register, suddenly some guy like McCarthy sees it, and here he is accusing everybody of being a communist. Got the House of House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, HUAC is what they call it. It's like the Salem witch trials all over again, except they're accusing people of being communists. And the number of people they convicted was exactly zero. Yeah, people would get punished, people got persecuted, people got blacklisted, weren't allowed to work because they were suspected of being communists. And you had no evidence, which, by the way, is unconstitutional. But like I said, when you get scared, you start doing things you wouldn't do. Anyway, your friend Joseph McCarthy clearly was trying this for some kind of political gain, looking at higher office. It didn't work out for him. They eventually got tired of his shtick, especially when he wanted to investigate people in army ranks. And then finally, President Eisenhower time said, that's enough, you're done. And Joseph McCarthy had a huge drinking problem and died of cirrhosis of the liver. So karma, it will come back after you. Don't accuse people of stuff unless you got evidence. Now, our friend Truman won the election in 48 by the skin of his teeth, decided he wasn't running in 52. And here comes Dwight D. Eisenhower, first Republican since Hoover to win. The last president who never had a political office until Donald Trump. Donald Trump had never had political office in his life. Now he's president. Dwight D. Eisenhower never been a politician either. Now he's president. Of course, he was running the European Theater of Operations. So everybody knows who Dwight D. Eisenhower is. Dwight D. Eisenhower is a calm, steady guy. Everything's going to work out fine, right? You get a problem, go to Dwight. He takes care of it. He's at the wheel. Everything's going to be fine because it's Dwight D. Eisenhower. We don't get excited. We don't freak out. We just get it done. Perfect guy for the 50s. And 56 too. Yep, he just strolled right onto another re-election. No problem. Now, America in the 1950s, it's very prosperous. People have money. People are happy, but they're also upset because they're terrified of being fingered as a communist or accused of all sorts of things. And, I don't know. It's something about human beings. They got to find something to complain about, maybe. I don't know what this is. Well, in 1950, we start seeing the television, also called the idiot box. Yep, somebody figured that one out real quick. Described by the Federal Communication Commission as one vast wasteland because it basically is. Federal Communication Commission, they do technical stuff mainly, how far does a radio station reach out for interference with another one and who gets what channel. Content is something they usually don't monitor until people like Howard Stern went bonkers. But, FCC's got to get all the technical stuff together. The suburbs are growing. How about that? The burbs. Everybody's moving out to the suburbs. Now everybody wants to live downtown. They move out to the suburbs. It's like a donut, man. You got a big hole right in the middle. City centers begin to fall apart, and you got to find some way to keep the city centers going because your cities are growing so much they start turning into smaller cities. And urban sprawl, it's badly planned out, traffic jams. Yeah, they didn't think it through sometimes because, it's not something that happens immediately. It's one of these small, steady things, and one day you got a problem. A lot of people moving down to the Sun Belt. Sun Belt's places where it doesn't snow all the time. basically anywhere south of Maryland, south of Kentucky. I'm drawing the line all the way across here. Kansas, maybe a little bit below Kansas. And then, and then of course the West Coast is okay below, Portland. So Sunbelt's also big down in Florida, places like that, because air conditioning is now something that is built into houses. People actually use air conditioning now. It's not a special thing anymore. Plus, more factories, you get jobs. Unfortunately, more factory get environmental damage. Everyone's got a job, everyone's got money they got to spend, which leaves more stuff to make, more stuff to make. People get paid for it, but more factories get environmental damage too. Yep, they knew about it in the 50s. It wasn't they're not quite aware of it as we are now, maybe because there wasn't as much damage in the 50s, but some people were thinking ahead. And here's one lady who was thinking ahead, Rachel Carson, book called Silent Spring. She's a biologist and ecologist here. She's talking about use of chemicals and pesticide in the environment. And she says this stuff's going to come back to bite us one day, not to mention it causes kind of problems with people eating it. And there's a nasty habit of factories dumping stuff back into the water. Yeah, and this water goes somewhere. There's always a city somewhere down the water here, right? So the Water Quality Act, she was instrumental in getting that passed. She was neither Republican or Democrat. She said this needs to be done for everybody. And she is basically the mother, or probably now grandmother, of the modern environmental movement. Nice lady, smart lady, got this done. You got to start somewhere because without water, you don't have anything. Hey, what's this thing? Yeah, it's an ENAC. Everybody knows what an ENAC is, right? Electrical, numerical, numerator, and computer. After a while, they just call it computer. All the computers, even your phones, all based on this thing. This is something they're working on in the Second World War. One of these things they invented, weren't sure where it was going to go, but they figured it'd be important one day. Naturally, the ladies are working on it first. And the computer, of course, is the bedrock of everything we do today. Phones, the power grid, TVs, football game, scoreboards, everything's run with a computer these days. And this is where it began. It started off with complicated mathematical equations, and you're like, so what? But think about it. Everything's 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. So it's got to start somewhere. It started off basically as a big calculator, and now it has mushroomed into all kinds of different things. I guess it's probably not a good idea to watch any Terminator movies after I just said this, right? Now, downside of life in the 50s. Everyone's got food. Everyone's got the house, the wife, the 2 cars, the 2.5 kids, the whole thing. Everybody's got something. Everyone's happy. But there's downside of life in the 50s, like being accused of being a communist, right? And then there's other problems too. Look at this picture. Do people look particularly happy too? This guy might be. Yeah, see, nobody looks happy. You're wearing the same clothes. So everyone's got a hat. This guy looks really upset. At least he's got a newspaper. Must have read something that upset him. Looks like Mr. H's uncle over here. All right. Yeah, it's all the same. Everyone looks the same, talk the same, act the same. Nobody wants to live in a place like that. Might as well be the Soviet Union, right? Called it the cult of conformity. And if you acted different, boom, you're a communist, even though you have a right to be different. The cult of conformity, an America of mass housing, mass markets, mass corporations, massive government, mass media, and massive boredom, right? There's just not a lot to do. There's like 2 channels on TV. It's black and white most of the time. There's baseball you can go watch. Football's getting started. There's stuff to do, but it just seems to be something missing. That's just human nature. Everyone always gets upset. They want something else to do. They're always looking for another challenge. And in the 50s, it doesn't appear to be too many challenges. Here come the beatniks. Before they were hippies, they were beatniks. Again, people who are acting different and everyone freaks out. The beatniks, living by their code of rebellion and mutiny. This guy doesn't look particularly threatening, does he? He just sits there and beats on the bongo drums, toss him a quarter or so. It's a reaction to the cult of conformity. Like I said, nobody wants to wear suit and tie all the time and look the same, act the same, talk about the same thing every day to the same people. Someone wants to go out and be a little bit different, and some people freak out about it. If you're going to be a nonconformist, go all the way with it, man. Bongo drums are nice, but just keep going. Hey, here's the beatnik standard bearer. Here's Elvis. Now, he played that that really wild rock and roll music, right? And then had these hip movements that were supposed to be offensive and suggestive. Be honest with you, man. I mean, when they showed him on the Ed Sullivan show, just from this part up, the waist on up, but there's other footage where you can see him shaking around the hips and the knees. And I'll be honest with you, it looks more like knee movements. I don't understand what that's all about. I saw nothing suggestive. Maybe it's just the 1950s versus the 2010 view of the world. I don't know. But eventually, he'll get accepted. It's Elvis, not only in America, but all around the world. And believe it or not, he got drafted, served in the Army, came back, and went back into singing again. Not exactly revolutionary, is he? Now, America's got the world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. There we are. Got the car, everybody's dressed nice, got the two kids, got the little dog over here. It's not working out for everybody because, well, we still got a bit of a segregation problem over here. It was starting to go away in the U.S. military. They ended it completely by an executive order. But that's not right. You can't call yourself a free country if these people have to get in the back of the line because their skin color's not the same. You talk about communism as a threat to freedom, and I don't know, these guys don't look particularly free, do they? Or particularly happy. I keep telling everybody over and over, the name of this country is the United States of America. U.S., us, that means everybody. So let's get rid of segregation in the schools. Brown versus Board of Education, a 1954 Supreme Court Act. That's it. No more segregation in a public school. Everybody goes to school together. Right? Look at this. They're going to get along fine. No problem. Here's the flag. Everyone's pledging allegiance. I think he stole somebody's lunch over here. But, kids are kids. Plessy versus Ferguson was the Supreme Court case that actually said segregation was legal, separate, but equal. And I'm glad they got around to ending that 58 years later. Way to go, Supreme Court, but I guess better late than never. That's the end of legal segregation everywhere. No more of these different water fountains, no more different movie theaters. It's going to take a while. Okay, you just can't flip a switch because, as you can guess, in the 60s, there's going to be a lot of problems when it comes to segregation and desegregation. Hey, the Montgomery bus boycott about the same time. Rosa Parks gets it started, right? If you can't have segregation, they used to make African Americans sit in the back of the bus, which I never understood. Well, actually, it's the 1950s. No air conditioning on the bus. If you sit in the back, you catch the breeze, right? But the point is, you pay, get on there, sit wherever you want. Well, she was arrested for refusing to give her seat to a white gentleman, and she goes to jail for it, and they boycotted the bus. African Americans in Montgomery, Alabama, quite a few white friends did it as well, and they finally decided to end that. Of course, Brown versus Board of Education, Supreme Court cases in your corner too, so that probably helped. So the end of racial segregation on public transportation. Plessy versus Ferguson is what got segregation started on trains. Not that that's been overturned by Brown versus Board. Like I said, you got a Supreme Court case in your corner. Well, that's the good news. Anybody can ride the bus now. The bad news, buses still suck. Ever been on a bus in Philly or New York? Oh my goodness, man. You're better off walking. Try to avoid the bus if you possibly can. They used to have felt seats, I heard when, a long time ago back in the dark ages. Now it's that hard plastic. You know why? People spill their food on it. People get sick on it. Yeah, you don't want to ride a bus in Philly, New York. Try to avoid it if you can. On the plus side, first time Mr. H got on a bus in Pittsburgh, he found $5 on the floor. So, big money when you're 10 years old. What is this all about? At the end of the day, segregation, desegregation, all this stuff's about respect. That's what everybody wants, regardless of your skin color. Black, white, red, yellow, brown. If I missed anybody, sorry about it. But it's about respect. Treat me like you yourself would like to be treated. And Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in the 20th century baseball. We know who did it in the 19th, right? Remember Moses Freeman? But it's been so long people forgot about him. So here's Jackie Robinson. I'm not concerned you liking or disliking me. I just ask you respect me as a human being. That's all anybody wants. Respect. And to be fast enough to steal home plate, right? I just like this picture. I think this is an awesome picture. All right, so this lecture went on a little bit long, but that's okay. It covered two different chapters for you. Okay, you guys have yourself a great day. The two chapters covered, by the way, were 25 and 26, Cold War up to 1960. When you start seeing stuff about Kennedy, you can stop reading. You guys have yourself a great day, and I will talk to you later. Das vidanya.